Israel's secret weapon.
Let me stay in your arms, I'm addicted to your charms. You're getting to be a habit with me.
Meet the Elofs. 5 years ago, they adopted a man they'd never met, who writes to them from a prison cell in Israel.
My dearest Nick and Mary, I'm very glad to hear from you so soon. About the next parole hearing, I don't know what will happen. We've passed a long time in a very bad, cruel condition. We will see what the US is going to do with Iraq, if they'll go to war.
The man they adopted is Mordecai Vanunu, jailed as a traitor. He spent 11 years in solitary confinement.
He was buried alive. He was shut up in a 6-by-9-foot cell. No windows, so he couldn't see outside. Even when he exercised, there was a canvas around him when he was out walking.
He has spent more time in isolation in a prison in the Western world than any other human being. It was that bad. His condition was that bad. And that's what really moved us to adopt him. How can a country treat a human being that way?
Vanunu moved to Israel as a child with his family from Morocco. He served in the Israeli army, studied philosophy, and found work at Dimona. This mysterious complex in the Negev desert employed thousands of people, all sworn to secrecy. For years, Israel called it a textile factory, never admitting its true purpose, making plutonium for bombs. Vanunu's dissent over government policies was noted. He was given a warning and decided to leave. But not without the evidence which would change history. Today, his are still the only photographs ever seen of the inside of Israel's nuclear bomb factory. It's 16 years since Sunday Times journalist Peter Haunem heard rumours that an Israeli whistleblower was offering proof of what the world had long suspected.
Here was someone who'd said he'd worked right inside the plutonium separation plant, helping to fabricate atomic weapons, who had taken photographs of the machinery, and who had lots of information about how much material was being processed and so on. And therefore he was potentially going to be able to provide incontrovertible evidence that Israel had a very advanced program.
Haunem flew to meet Vanunu, who is now a Christian living in Australia. He was brought to England. He was hidden in a country hotel and smuggled into the paper's offices in the boot of a car while they checked his story. But Israeli intelligence agents, caught here on Wapping's security cameras, were onto him. They were waiting to strike. It took weeks for the Sunday Times to go to press with their scoop. When they finally did, on October the 5th, 1986, Vanunu had vanished. He'd met an American woman in Leicester Square who seemed to like him. He was vulnerable and afraid. When she suggested he'd be safer with her in Rome, he fell for it. It was a classic honey trap. Once in Rome, the full weight of Israel's wrath kicked in. Vanunu was overpowered, assaulted, and drugged. He'd been kidnapped and smuggled back to Israel by boat, unconscious. For weeks, no one knew where he was. Eventually, the Israelis brought Vanunu to court for a secret trial. They now admitted they had him, but still no one knew how he'd got there. His kidnap, an illegal act on foreign soil, was kept secret. Somehow Vanunu found a pen and solved the mystery for the waiting press. Hijacked in Rome, 30th of September 1986. It was Shimon Peres, then Prime Minister, who'd ordered Vanunu's capture. To this day, the kidnap remains an official state secret. Peres was the father of Israel's secret nuclear program, and for him, Vanunu was a spy.
He was a traitor to his country.
So what was your reaction?
Very negative.
What did you do?
What I thought should be done.
Which was what?
To put him to trial.
Kidnap him?
My lady, I can't go into all the processes. I'm unwilling. I don't see any reason to do so. The fact is that he was brought to trial.
Vanunu's trial was held in secret. He was found guilty of treason and espionage and sentenced to 18 years in jail.
Vanunu was treated this way out of revenge, out of a way to deter others, and because actually he's the person who broke the taboo of the secrecy in the Israel society, a very strong and influencing taboo in a very closed society, more like a tribe.
Mordechai Vanunu started his sentence on the 27th of March 1988. Few tears were shed. For most Israelis, he was more than a traitor. He'd rejected Judaism. His parents declared him dead, and the world forgot about Israel's nuclear whistleblower. But the truth was out.
Vanunu told the world that Israel had developed between 100 and 200 atomic bombs and had gone on to develop neutron bombs and thermonuclear weapons, enough to destroy the entire Middle East, and nobody has done anything about it since.
Today, proliferation experts report Israel has the world's sixth largest nuclear arsenal, with small tactical nuclear weapons, nuclear landmines, as well as medium-range nuclear missiles launchable from air, land or sea. It's thought plutonium is made in Dimona. Nuclear weapons are assembled at Yodafat and stored at Zechariah and El Abun. 3 nuclear submarines are based in Haifa, and Israel's biological and chemical warfare laboratories are at Nes Ziona. Israel never comments on such reports. But evidence continues to emerge. In 1992, an Israeli cargo plane crashed in Amsterdam, killing 43 people. The Israelis claimed it was carrying flowers and perfume. It took 6 years and a Dutch parliamentary inquiry before they admitted it was carrying DMMP, a key component for sarin nerve gas. The DMMP was bound for the Israeli Institute of Biological Research at Nes Ziona, one of Israel's most secret defense sites. It's subject to no international inspection, and reporting of its activities in Israel is prevented by strict military censorship. As America prepared for war, signs of dissent sprouted on the suburban lawns of Middle America. Nick and Mary Eloff have been peace campaigners since the Vietnam War and the draft.
The definition of a conscientious objector is someone who sincerely objects to participation in all forms of war. There are 2 words that are extremely important in that definition: sincere and all.
Fear that the draft might return brought a new generation to the local church hall to hear how, if they're ever called up to fight, they can claim their right to refuse. For the Eloffs, Mordechai Vanunu is the ultimate conscientious objector. When they first visited him in 1997, it was his 11th year in solitary confinement.
And we waited, and they brought him in, and he looked like an old man. I didn't anticipate that. And he came up to us, and he put his fingers through the bars, through the cage, because it was a steel cage. And we were crying. We felt so awful to see him like this.
Vanunu writes regularly. It's the only communication he's allowed with the outside world. But his letters take months to arrive, and they're always censored.
Oh, and he says, don't feel so bad, we can bear another year.
My, what courage.
The early letters that we got were totally cut out. I mean, you could pick it up. This isn't even an example, because they were cut out more than that. More than this. They use a highlighter, and then they bring it to Mordecai, and he has to cut out the things that they've highlighted. And one time, he said they weren't paying attention, and so he just put the pieces in the envelope. We got them because we said, we got the pieces, we got the cutouts. And they're really not even significant. I think it's control, total control.
Today, Jerusalem is a ghost town, drained of life. Israel's nuclear weapons have proved useless in its latest war. The suicide bombers have frightened the tourists away. The economy's collapsed. Israelis have learnt to live with war. Every citizen gets a gas mask, is taught how to use it, and is expected to have it ready in case of attack. Nuclear weapons are seen as a justifiable deterrent by most Israelis who feel besieged by enemies. 40 years ago, Uzi Evan, then a young scientist at Dimona, was in at the start of Israel's bomb.
We were a very small country. We were surrounded by much, much larger, more populous states on borders that are almost impossible to defend. And the Holocaust was very much in our memory at that time. And we all realized that we have to do something to prevent the same scenario from happening again. So we were a young crew, most of us were very young, very enthusiastic, working on something we believed is essential for our existence here. Like building the final insurance policy that we will not be attacked or terminated.
It was the young Shimon Peres back in the 50s who negotiated a secret deal with the French to buy a nuclear weapons reactor like theirs. But while Dimona was going up, intelligence reports reached Washington that Israel was building an atom bomb. Despite claims that Dimona was for peaceful purposes only, Israel's leader Ben-Gurion was summoned to Washington. President Kennedy feared an arms race in the Middle East and demanded inspections. But when inspectors finally entered the plant in May 1961, they were tricked. They were shown a fake control room on the ground floor. They were unaware of the 6 floors below where the plutonium was made.
Well, this was something of great pride and almost a legendary story in Dimona, according to Vanunu. When the Americans came, they were completely hoodwinked. All the entrances, including the lift shafts, were bricked up and plastered over, so it was impossible for anyone to find their way down to the lower floors.
After Kennedy's assassination, the pressure on Israel was off. His successor, Lyndon Johnson, turned a blind eye. Then, in 1969, Israel's Golda Meir and Richard Nixon struck a deal renewed by every president to this day. Israel's nuclear program could continue as long as it was never made public. It's called nuclear ambiguity. The term nuclear ambiguity, in some ways it sounds very grand, but isn't it just a euphemism for deception?
If somebody wants to kill you and you use a deception to save your life, it's not immoral. If we wouldn't have enemies, we wouldn't need deceptions. We wouldn't need the talent.
Was this the justification also for concealing the flaws of the plutonium reprocessing areas from the Americans, the inspectors, when they came?
You are having a dialogue with yourself, not with me.
But that's been documented in a number of books.
Ask the question to yourself, not to me.
But is it not true?
I don't have to answer your questions here. I don't see any reason why.
Ambiguity is a luxury unique to Israel. Today, the country's an inspection-free zone, protected from scrutiny by America and her allies.
This is the place where Vanunu identifies as the separation plant, built mostly underground. And this is the silver dome of the Dimona nuclear reactor.
Ronan Bergman is an Israeli journalist specializing in security and defense.
This picture was taken by one of the best commercial satellites available, called Iconos. And Iconos is capable of taking pictures up to the resolution of 1 meter. However, due to the demand of Israel, the American Congress ruled a new amendment to the law that forbids American satellites to sell anything of Israeli sites that is better than 2 meters. Meaning the Iconos is taking the imagery of Israel and then they change the imagery to the resolution of 2 meters.
Worse, less clear.
Much less clear and worse. Yeah.
And that was a ruling in the United States, but specifically for Israel, not for other countries?
Only to Israel.
Last November, there were signs of a softening towards Vanunu. The authorities allowed pictures to be taken at his parole hearing. Parole itself has always been refused. Vanunu still has secrets, the prosecutor claims, that could harm Israel. It's an argument his lawyer will have to fight at the next hearing. Will the court hear the secret that they claim Vanunu holds?
They will hear some of the secrets, not the real secrets. They will hear secrets about the secrets.
And you too, as his lawyer, will hear those?
Part of it, less than the court. The court will hear the secrets about the secrets. I may hear the secrets about the secrets about the secrets.
Is that really the case, or is that a sort of ironic?
No, it's really the case. I will be giving some type of general description of the secrets. The court will get something more concrete, and the secrets themselves will be never released to anybody if they exist at all.
In January, Nick and Mary Eloff came to Israel. They hoped to visit Vanunu in prison, but they didn't yet have permission.
Hi. How are you? Oh gosh, any news?
Not yet.
Not good news.
Not yet.
Raina Moss is one of a small group of Israelis campaigning for Vanunu's release. She'd been hassling the prison authorities for weeks to get Nick and Mary the necessary permissions.
He says he never got a fax from them.
What she says now is that they have approval from one authority, but she's waiting for approval from a second authority.
Do they clearly understand that our time limitation that we're due to be leaving on Friday?
Oh, absolutely. I made that absolutely clear to them. I said that you're leaving on Friday. I said that you've already been here for a couple of days.
Well, I appreciate you making all these calls, Raina.
Oh, it's nothing. I don't mind it. It's just, I wish I'd had good news for you.
40-year-old reactors are usually shut down. But Dimona grinds on. Dimona's under the control of the Prime Minister, beyond the reach of Parliament or public scrutiny. And that worries the scientist who once worked there so optimistically.
As the reactor gets older and the tendency to have accidents becomes more probable, you should have an outside watchdog. And the secrecy more or less created in an exterritorial area in Israel where standard procedures of safety, monitoring, is not implemented. So worker safety, environmental questions, industrial safety procedures, all are not covered, and there are thousands of people working there.
But the secrets of this old reactor are beginning to leak. Evidence has seeped out of accidents, lies and deceit. In 1996, the press heard rumours of a radioactive hotspot in the desert. The Environment Minister took them to watch him test the site with a Geiger counter. They weren't allowed to bring their own, one journalist told me. The minister proclaimed the site clean. The readings for radioactivity his instruments showed were below normal. But journalists weren't happy.
מה שאנחנו מוטרדים זה מנושא הקבורה של הפסולת גבוהה. אתה יכול להגיד לנו איפה למשל קבורה פסולת כזו?
במקום טוב. באמת, אני לא יכול, אני אומר לך בגילוי, כלומר, אין טעם שתלחצי עליי. זה דבר שהוא מוגדר על ידי מישהו צריך להיות מוגדר, הבעל הבית שלי, הוא יפטר אותי. ראש הממשלה כדבר שלא מפרסמים אותו.
עכשיו אנחנו מגלים בפעם הראשונה את פעולות ההסוואה של הכור.
But on Israeli television last year, a groundbreaking documentary alleged it was a cover-up. Aryeh Spieler, a Holocaust survivor and a loyal Dimona worker for 27 years, described how he'd been told to prepare the site for the minister's visit by removing contaminated waste from a deep crater. He said he'd replaced it with fresh soil and planted trees to cover the hole, as though it had never happened. Then he said they brought the minister and the press to prove that everything was okay. 5 Dimona workers appeared on the programme. They'd given their lives for Dimona, they said, and now they felt betrayed. They broke no secrets, only the code of silence. They said they'd worked with uranium. There were fires, spills, explosions of toxic gas. Now that they were sick, they said, the plant didn't want to know. The management was denying they'd worked with radioactive materials, and because they were bound to secrecy, they couldn't fight for their rights. The program listed more than 100 Dimona workers who developed cancer and whose claims were being ignored. A doctor and 2 lawyers backed their story. It was the first time Dimona workers had spoken out. I want to talk to Aryeh Spieler. He's suffering from cancer, and in the last few years he's seen a number of his friends and colleagues who worked there with him die of the disease. He's been fighting for compensation for their families, for their widows, and I know he'd really like to talk to us about this. He's told me he wishes he could, but he's also told me he's been warned off, he's been told not to talk. But I'm going to go and see him and see if he'll change his mind. I just wanted to ask you, why you can't...
הביטחון סגר אותי מהקריה ועד לקריית כמה. סגרו אותי לגמרי ואמרו, אין. מילה אחת, אז מה אני אעשה? מה אני אעשה? אמרו לי, יש לך סוף של בלון. נו, מה תגיד על זה? הוא כבר יושב כמה? 15 שנה. רוצה שאני אשב במלאק. אני נורא רוצה. עשיתי סיבוב על כולם, וכולם אמרו לא. כל החבר'ה שהייתי בטוח שילכו איתי לפחות קבוצה, אף אחד.
ביי. It was time to try the others, the doctors, the relatives, the lawyers.
Hello?
Hello. I just wanted to ask you whether there would be any possibility of doing an interview with you about the cancer victims and about their case.
I'm really reluctant to be interviewed publicly on the media over this story overseas. It's just not appropriate.
But why is it so sensitive?
Come on now. Any discussion of nuclear issues is sensitive.
I talked with my family. I don't want to participate on this. I don't think it's the right thing to do.
Nobody is prepared to talk about it.
There are things that are not, it's not good to talk about, even if you're a lawyer.
Are you worried about a sort of Vanunu scenario?
Of course you think about it.
I just don't get it. If this was the Soviet Union or Iraq or North Korea, I'd understand why people are so scared to talk. But this is Israel. It's supposed to be a democracy. In Israel today, an invisible power enforces the code of silence through fear. It comes from one man whose own identity was itself a secret until 2 years ago. Yehiel Horev.
Horev is the smartest, most brilliant official figure in the sense of gathering power. He took some kind of very small office and made him the fourth intelligence agency in Israel, with no law, with no real scrutiny and monitoring by the Israeli parliament. And in this sense, he's I think, a grave danger to Israeli democracy.
For 16 years, Horev has been the faceless guardian of Israel's secrets. His picture had never been published before this program. It's Horev from his office at the Ministry of Defense who is blocking Vanunu's early release. But next year, Vanunu's sentence is up, so Horev found a new Vanunu. Brigadier General Yitzhak Yaakov, known to his friends as Yatza. In his retirement, he wrote a fictionalized memoir and talked on camera about his life. A distinguished soldier and scientist, Yaakov had for years led Israel's top-secret weapons development program. So eminent was he was a candidate for the prestigious Israel Prize. But when he told his life story to a journalist, he broke the rules. The journalist was Ronan Bergman. He showed his article, as all Israelis must, to the censor. It went straight to Horev, who sent in the heavies.
They were deadly serious. My phones were bugged. I was followed by Israeli Secret Service. Yatza was followed by Israeli Secret Service. And the whole system was surrounding us and following us and stalking us.
Yaakov went from hero to zero. He was arrested secretly and charged with treason. He spent 2 years fighting Horev. 2 years of jail, heart disease, bankruptcy, and house arrest ended in public disgrace. He was spared prison, but the court found him guilty of betraying Israel's secrets.
Horev was afraid that veterans of the Israeli army, the Israeli intelligence, the Israeli nuclear effort would try to maintain their footprint in the history of Israel and tell their story, and he wanted to frighten them, and in this sense he was successful.
Do you think that there is too much secrecy, the power of somebody like Horev to destroy the life of an individual like this Brigadier General Yaakov, for example? The man's life was destroyed, and he'd been a very loyal Israeli all his life.
It happens, unfortunately, in life, of false accusations, and some innocent people are paying a high cost. I cannot see how can it be avoidable.
Israel's parliament had never debated Dimona or nuclear weapons until one MP 3 years ago forced them onto the agenda for the first time. Issam Mahul, an Israeli Arab, broke the taboo to the outrage of his colleagues.
לא השליח באמונו הוא הבעיה, אלא מדיניות ממשלות ישראל לדורותיהן, שהפכה את פיסת הטריטוריה הקטנה הזו לפח אשפה גרעיני רעיל ומרעיל, שעלול להעלות את כולנו השמיימה עם הפטריה הגרעינית.
These words, uttered in the heart of Israel's democracy, was seen by his fellow MPs as a sacrilege.
כל העולם יודע כי ישראל היא מחסן אדיר של נשק אטומי, ביולוגי וכימי, המשמש כעוגן למרוץ החימוש הגרעיני במזרח התיכון.
He wasn't allowed to finish his speech, but he'd made his point. But in his constituency during the recent election campaign, it was a different story. Here, his audience are, like him, Israeli Arabs.
بدهم يفتشوا عن أسلحة دمار شامل وأسلحة نووية. أنا بقول لهم وين في أسلحة نووية وأسلحة دمار شامل إذا بدهم. أنا بقول لهم وين موجودة. في ديمونا موجودة، في خليج حيفا، في جبل علبون، في منطقة سخنين، يدفاتا. بدهم أسلحة نووية؟ بدهم أسلحة دمار شامل؟ يجوا يفتشوا، يبعثوا مفتشين، أنا باخذهم من إيدهم.
In the countdown to war, there was a cry going up of a double standard. The world had to check Iraq's nuclear installations, but not Israel's.
How can you compare it? Iraq is a dictatorship. Saddam Hussein is a killer. He killed 100,000 Kurds with gas bombs. How can you compare it at all? Just because he calls himself a state, it's not a state, it's a mafia. He's not a leader, he's a killer. You cannot say it about us.
But even in Israel, some do. The current Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, directed the invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Thousands of innocent civilians were killed. The worst excesses were in the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila, for which an Israeli inquiry held Sharon personally responsible. In Belgium, there are plans to prosecute these alleged war crimes. While Sharon has been Prime Minister, 700 Israelis have been killed, but more than 2,000 Palestinians have died in attacks by Israeli soldiers. The Israeli army has used new, unidentified weapons. In February 2001, a new gas was used in Gaza. 180 patients were admitted to hospitals with severe convulsions.
The Israelis say this is tear gas, but this is not tear gas. We have never seen this gas before. We need some medicine for treatment, but it must be the right medicine.
We ask what kind of gas, but nobody verified for us the type of gas to give the antidote at that moment. Also, we don't know how to check, how to examine, how to send this. We are in occupied area. We are surrounded. It's impossible to send these samples to international lab to test.
Israel is outside chemical and biological weapons treaties and still refuses to say what the new gas was. The Elofs have waited 3 days and they've still not heard from the prison. They have 1 day left in Israel. They're worried they may have to leave without seeing their adopted son. Today they're having lunch with a small group of activists who for 16 years have fought in vain for Vanunu's release.
Want to pressurize Iraq about nuclear weapons? What about Israel and the nuclear weapons?
Imagine for one moment that Mordechai Vanunu was not an Israeli, that the whole story had happened with a Korean or an Iranian or a Pakistani technician. He would have had the Nobel Peace Prize. He would have been the second Sakharov. Instead, he is a non-person in the West. And this tells you what we're dealing with. We are dealing with the number one privileged state on earth.
Counter to the Israeli argument that the whole world is against us. It is exactly the opposite. We started the nuclear race in the Middle East. There's no doubt about it, you see. And there is not even one important state in the Western Hemisphere who is dealing with it seriously.
You can talk all you want. We can sit here till tomorrow morning and discuss Israel's nuclear policy. We can discuss whatever we want. It's to people who work in those areas, in the weapons of mass destruction, the environment, Dimona itself, all these research places. Vanunu is a living warning to them. This is what will happen to you if you speak out. You'll be Vanunized. That's the warning. You will spend 10 years in solitary confinement. You will be cut off from your family. You will be cut off from everyone who knows you. You will be this prisoner without a number and without a name. That's what will happen to you if you speak out. The same persons we were. Our relationship with Mordechai.
It's the prison on the phone.
Oh, what did... Oh, how marvelous. What time? Well, if we come at 11, can we have an hour and a half? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.
On their last day, the Elofs get their visit. After an hour and a half, they emerge.
It's just wonderful. We're so excited we don't know what to think because he's... Oh, yeah, you talk.
It was a marvelous experience. It's the first time we've ever seen him so high and just anxious to talk about what's going on in his life and what he's looking forward to, especially the anticipation of getting out. He's just strong. That was his final word. Let him know that I'm strong and anxious to get out of here and out of Israel and just start a life all over again.
Yeah.
He was just beaming, I must say.
And he said the message to the world is that I have forgotten the last 16 years. I'm looking toward the future. I believe in a future of nonviolence.
So did he say he'd do it all again?
You know, he did. He said, of course I would. Isn't that incredible?
The Elofs have gone and Vanunu is again up for parole. But as usual, everything, even the location of the parole hearing, is secret. Apart from me and Peter Hounham, who's come from London, there are no other journalists here.
Mordechai Vanunu is in there. Mordechai Vanunu is in there.
Mordechai Vanunu in there. Is that where the case is being held?
He is the most sensitive prisoner that this country's got, and whenever he comes here, they block off the windows of his van if they can, or they... In the early days, they used to put a crash helmet over him so people couldn't see him. And at one point, they even had an electronic device that emitted a screeching signal so people couldn't hear him speak.
And yet, you and I are the only journalists here, the most sensitive prisoner Israel's got, and there's not a single member of the press here apart from you. Why do you keep coming?
I keep coming because he's in there, because he spoke to me and we published his story in the Sunday Times in 1986, and I feel a sense of responsibility that we should be helping him get out.
After 3 hours, the hearing ended. As usual, Vanunu left behind darkened windows. In court, Horev's prosecutor had cited the war with Iraq as a new reason for blocking parole.
The prosecutor, of course, went back to the old argument, that Vanunu is a threat to the security, and she even said that if Vanunu will be released, probably the Americans will leave Iraq and go after Israel and Israel nuclear weapons, which I found extremely ridiculous.
Minnesota, the Peace Bridge, and a weekly ritual. Every Wednesday, before and during the war, hundreds protested. Mary was there, and of course Nick.
No to war in Iraq.
Every week the numbers grew. There was a new generation of peaceniks who were children when Israel's nuclear weapons were exposed. Have any of you guys heard of Mordechai Vanunu?
No.
You don't know who he is?
No.
And if I tell you that he's somebody who exposed Israel's weapons of mass destruction, which nobody knew about until then, what would you say?
Why is our media that's supposed to be free and open not telling us? And why is our government not letting us know this information if we're living in the home of the free?
I think if our administration was consistent or had any integrity, then he'd be held up as a hero.
We're going to work with the members of the Security Council in the days ahead to make it clear to Saddam that the demands of the world and the United Nations will be enforced.
In Washington, which gives Israel more than $3 billion a year, the talk in the weeks leading up to war was only of Iraq. We tried to get an interview about Israel's weapons of mass destruction, but no one in this Bush administration would talk about Israel. So we asked for an interview about the military balance of power in the Middle East, to which they agreed. This morning, we've finally been told that we're going to have an interviewee. He's an expert in all matters Israeli, he's an Undersecretary of Defense, and his name is Douglas Feith. The Pentagon wanted our questions in advance, so it was nuclear ambiguity, Israel's security, allegations of a double standard, and Mordechai Vanunu.
The gravest danger facing America and the world is outlaw regimes that seek and possess nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons.
Yet again, the shutters have come down on this story. Our interview with Undersecretary for Defense Douglas Feith was scheduled for 4 o'clock, somewhere in this vast complex of the Pentagon behind me. Yet at the last minute, we've heard the interviews cancelled. Questions about Israel, it appears, are strictly off limits. We'd received this email from the Pentagon.
Ladies, we showed Mr. Feith the list of topics for the BBC interview. He is not willing to answer any of the questions you listed. Respectfully request you resubmit your questions as soon as possible this morning. Questions directed toward the current Iraqi situation.
On February the 19th, Vanunu was again refused parole. He remains in Ashkelon prison. Horev has let it be known he intends never to let Mordechai Vanunu leave Israel.